Hello, everyone. Welcome to this match in round one of the International Reparations Debate Competition. My name is Jermaine Barrett, and I will be the chair adjudicator in this match. This match features two very strong teams, and of course, we'll give you the opportunity to be introduced to them later on. But for now, let us become acquainted with our adjudicators. As I said, I'm Jermaine Barrett. I'll be the chair adjudicator, and I now invite Joshua Atkins to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joshua Atkins. I'll be serving as a wing judge for today's match. I'm looking forward to an exciting clash of ideas as we've seen over the past few matches earlier today.
All right, thank you very much, Joshua. And Koji Henry is another one of our adjudicators. Koji?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Koji Henry. I am also looking forward to a very engaging and most prosperous match today. I'll also be serving as one of the wing adjudicators in this match. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Koji. Now that we've met our adjudicators, rather, let us meet our team. So we have on-side proposition, the team San Fernando Central Secondary School. They're out of Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, they're going up against the team from Jamaica, Knox College. Let us get to know the debaters on the San Fernando Central Secondary School team. Go right ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hello, good afternoon. We represent San Fernando Central Secondary School of Trinidad and Tobago. To my right, this is
Asante Figueroa.
I am Colleen Glegon, and this is
Jasheda Odian.
And we are so happy to take part in this competition, and we wish our opponents the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, and let us now get to know our opposition team from Jamaica, Knox College.
Good day, everyone. We are Knox College. I am Sanjay Small. This is Ayana Matthews, and this is Sylvia Fullerton, and we are looking forward to a riveting match. And we are just looking to have a good conversation with our proposition on this matter.
All right, excellent. Of course, this competition has some fantastic sponsors and supporters and partners, and we're going to get to know them now. So, Joshua, who are our partners for this competition?
Our partners for this competition are the University of the West Indies, Center for Reparation Research, the UE Press, Jade, University of Hull, and our main partner, the Repair Campaign.
All right, thank you very much. And now we are almost ready for a debate, but to have a debate, we must have a motion. So, Joshua, what is our motion?
So the motion reads, this House would exclusively pursue infrastructural development as a form of reparation. Once again, this House would exclusively pursue infrastructural development as a form of reparation.
All right, quite an exciting and interesting motion that is. Now, for the rules, the debaters have already been briefed, but for you, our viewing audience, you will see three debaters on each team. Each debater has a different amount of time within which they'll be presenting. The first speaker will present for 7 minutes, the second speaker for 6 minutes, the third speaker for 5 minutes. After the first two speakers, that's first proposition, first opposition, we'll enter a period of cross-examination. In this period, the opposition will get to ask 10 seconds first, 10 seconds, three 10-second questions rather. And of course, we have replies coming from the proposition, each reply lasting for a maximum of 45 seconds. Then we will flip and allow the proposition to ask their three questions of the opposition. The rules regarding time remain the same. We'll enter another period of cross-examination after the second pair of speakers. That's a second proposition, second opposition, and the rules with respect to the timings for questions and answers will remain the same, except in this instant, the proposition team will get to ask their questions ahead of the opposition team. And then we'll pause for 1 minute. After the 1 minute pause, then we'll have the final submissions from each team, beginning with the reply speaker from the opposition side. Then we conclude with the final salvo from the proposition team. All right. So with that in mind, and I think our debaters are raring to go, let us make welcome the first speaker from the proposition team representing San Fernando Central Secondary School. Let us make that speaker welcome. Here, Prime Minister, you're up.
If the government has the right to free us, She had a right to make provision for us. And since she did not make it soon after emancipation, she ought to make it right now. Cali House. Esteemed judges, my opponents, and the audience, I am Colleen Glegon. And as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I firmly believe that this House would and should exclusively pursue infrastructural development as a form of reparations. Before I bring forth my plight, I must define reparations. Reparations are the corrective actions taken by former colonial powers to address the structural underdevelopment of Caribbean societies caused directly by slavery and colonialism. It is a known fact that the Caribbean was not underdeveloped by accident. CARICOM countries were deliberately engineered for extraction during the course of slavery, not growth. Plantations were prioritized over people. Ports were made for exports and not transportation for locals. And there was no investment in either healthcare, education, or housing for the formerly enslaved. Reparations must therefore repair the structural damage left behind. There has always been the unfortunate belief that one group must suffer for another to gain. This proposition and this motion will directly challenge the systematic oppression that has been put in place to keep those descendants of slavery under this unfortunate mental and societal chains. Thank you.
All right. It seems our Prime Minister has concluded her speech a little ahead of the scheduled end point, but
Sorry, excuse me.
yes,
So
go
sorry
ahead.
about that. I just had a bit of a issue there.
Okay, so do you want to continue?
Yes, thank you. Sorry
Okay,
about
go
that.
right ahead. Mhm.
Colonial powers designed Caribbean societies purely for economic extraction, constructing infrastructure only to facilitate the production and export of sugar, cocoa, and enslaved labor. It was not made to support long-term development. As a result, post-emancipation societies inherited weak and fragmented transport networks, underfunded healthcare systems, overcrowded housing, and limited access to education. Many Caribbean islands still rely on colonial-era road layouts that prioritize plantation access rather than community mobility, while the lack of specialist hospitals continues to force citizens to seek medical care abroad. Reparations must therefore focus on infrastructure because it directly addresses what was deliberately not built. Black slavery operated as a system of radicalized economic extraction, producing economies designed for exploitation rather than sustainable growth. How can growth happen if there's a black hole? Even after the formal end of slavery, colonial systems persisted for over a century, entrenching white economic dominance through institutional racism, while Black communities were left with poverty, weak infrastructure, and limited access to education and healthcare. Ongoing regional challenges such as low access to education, inadequate public health systems, widespread inequalities, and high rates of chronic non-communicable diseases are therefore presented not as accidental outcomes, but rather as a structural consequence as plantation economies and colonial neglect. This confirms that Caribbean underdevelopment is historically produced, making infrastructural reparations a necessary act of responsibility for harm caused rather than it being a symbolic gesture. Reparations, if they are meant to be meaningful, must address what was never built. Infrastructure is not symbolic, but rather it is transformative. As Prime Minister of a nation that predominantly consists of those who are the descendants of the slaves, it is my utmost duty to ensure that they receive all the reparations that they deserve for centuries of work. Regional equity is the concept that all residents, regardless of race, income, or location within an area, should have equal access to opportunities and resources. Other forms of reparations, such as cash Land, debt relief, or apologies may fail to reach everyone or cannot fix the structural inequalities left by colonialism. Things may be distributed equally, but they may not be distributed equitably. Cash reparations risk uneven impact. Direct payments to individuals can trigger inflation and devalue currency. They also don't address systematic issues like underfunded schools, hospitals, or weak transportation methods. Eligibility challenges determining who qualifies is difficult due to incomplete historical records, risking fraud or exclusion of rightful recipients. Land or property institution faces legal and logistical challenges. Returning land may spark disputes. It is also very slow to implement and may only benefit a few, leaving the majority of descendants without meaningful support. Infrastructure, by contrast, benefits all the Caribbean collectively. It builds self-reliance. It ensures a fair, sustainable, and lasting Caribbean uplift. It also promotes the pooling of resources, reduces duplication, and strengthens integration, helping small nations access services and opportunities they cannot afford alone. Infrastructure projects are tangible, they are long-lasting, and auditable, making them more reliable than cash or symbolic gestures. Every island sees concrete results in sharing reparation and actually repairing structural inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister from San Fernando Central Secondary School. Thank you for opening this debate. We now call upon the opposition leader who hails from Knox College in Jamaica to provide the opening speech on behalf of side opposition.
Has the time started?
No, the time will start once you get started.
Mr. Speaker, the government mentioned education. Education is a form of reparation, yet you support exclusively pursuing infrastructural development. Mr. Speaker, infrastructural development exclusively is not sufficient. According to the Oxford Dictionary, exclusively means excluding or not admitting other things. Pursue means to try and achieve a goal, and reparations are measures taken to acknowledge, redress, and repair harm, injustice, and human rights violation caused by state, countries, institutions, or groups. It aims to provide justice through restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, or apologies. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the context of this debate, to exclusively pursue infrastructural development means to only try to achieve one form of reparation. Although we were not only affected economically, we were affected emotionally, psychologically, culturally, and physically. To limit the form of reparations to only infrastructural development is suggesting that the harms of chattel slavery can all be addressed by only that form of reparation. It is suggesting that all the exploitation and maltreatment can be solved by this one reparation. Countries that were under colonial rule have had their raw resources depleted by the British. The economies that were made for agricultural purposes are now declining because colonizers had taken control of our countries and used what should have been ours for their own use. Caribbean countries have been impoverished. They are underdeveloped. So, Mr. Speaker, infrastructural development alone exclusively cannot atone or support all these effects. Secondly, the government is more suitable to decide what form must be taken. Remember that not all colonies had suffered the same casualties, therefore not all colonies require the same solution. Different nations may benefit more from educational programs, cultural restoration, historical research, debt relief, or official acknowledgement. By allowing only infrastructure, the motion ignores these differences and treats all victims as though their situations are the same. As a result, the policy becomes incomplete. It assists some countries while providing minimal relevance to others. A reparation system must be flexible to properly redress and repair harm. Restricting it prevents justice from being fully achieved. Mr. Speaker, take for example the Bahamas, St. Kitts and Nevis, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago. They have key infrastructural development, highly developed urban areas, high-speed digital connectivity, modernized ports, robust public transport and utility network, heavy industrial infrastructure, and massive building booms. Here are countries that are developing on their own at a high rate, yet countries like Haiti are in need of social reforms as well as infrastructural development. An exclusive approach, Mr. Speaker, would not work. Additionally, Guyana is developing at a fast rate in terms of GDP, but their infrastructure is poor and they need infrastructure development, but not only this form. Therefore, we must take into consideration each and every need of these countries to properly analyze and determine the immediate needs. Mr. Speaker, to mechanize reparations across the Caribbean is oversimplified by the government and is indeed a complex and diplomatic and legal challenge. Even CARICOM, who is the head of the Reparations Committee, CRC, argues that regions' current development struggles are structurally engineered underdevelopment because of centuries of colonial extraction. We, the opposition, suggest the following rather than solely infrastructural development. Might I add that countries may not need. Let us prioritize a country by development framework. 1. Debt cancellation. Myriads of Caribbean countries carried a debt to GDP ratio of 60 to 80% due to inherited colonized poverty. Clearing this debt, Mr. Speaker, will allow for national growth and investment. 2. Mr. Speaker, we advocate as the opposition for technological advancement. Region in this way, we demand access to European science and technology. 3. Social intervention. Mr. Speaker, we ask for intervention. For example, Haiti, who is engulfed in gangs and crimes as a result of chattel slavery, would need social and educational reparatory systems. Why building infrastructure alone cannot solve the problem? Building physical infrastructure, example bridges, roads, buildings, is the hardware of the solution, but doesn't address the software, so it cannot be the total solution. Mr. Speaker, what about our psychological trauma that physical roads cannot fix? Building a school, Mr. Speaker, is useless without a curriculum that decolonizes history and provides the skill set for 21st century economy. And if we are to maintain a nuanced approach, Mr. Speaker, building infrastructures can be a debt trap and can actually worsen the problem of fiscal development. We believe that reparatory justice is multidimensional, and the approach of infrastructure development cannot solve our issue. I yield the floor.
Thank the leader of the opposition for that speech. And we now enter the first exciting segment of cross-examination. As I said before, in this segment, the opposition team gets to ask 3 questions of the proposition team. Each question is limited to 10 seconds, each response limited to 45 seconds. Team opposition, Knox College, you may ask your 3 questions of team San Fernando Central Secondary School.
All right, so proposition: if post-colonial states already struggle to maintain existing infrastructure with their limited funds and resources, how does adding more without the prerequisite systemic reform avoid deepening fiscal dependency on Europe?
We thank you for that question. Contrary to the opposition's belief, infrastructure does not refer to roads or buildings, but infrastructure rather refers to the colonial systems of control, power, and restrictions of movement that have been put in place to limit growth, We are not referring to roads or buildings or funds. We are referring to those colonial powers that still hang over us as a dark cloud. I would like to use Trinidad and Tobago as an example. Most roads in Trinidad and Tobago are pathways to plantations, rather than there being roadways to communities. This, however, it may reflect that they lead to economic places, and we're referring to roads, but rather infrastructure in this context.
Time.
Ooh.
All right, thank you for that answer. Secondly, what measures are going to be put in place to ensure that all citizens of the Caribbean benefit from these infrastructural developments, regardless of their background, location, and social association?
Could you please repeat the question?
All right, so the question reads, what measures are going to be put in place to ensure that all citizens of the Caribbean benefit from these infrastructural developments, regardless of their background, location, or social association?
For this form of reparations to take place, infrastructure has to be redesigned to serve local needs rather than to serve extraction. So as my earlier point, roads should not lead to plantations, but rather for communities to build and foster that healing.
All right, thank you for that answer. And my third question is, why should reparations be limited to infrastructure when harms also included land dispossession, cultural destruction, and integrational wealth losses, disparities, and habits that infrastructure cannot address by itself?
Right. As stated earlier in the argument, land and property restitution can face legal and logistical challenges, and returning land can spark disputes. We are trying to heal and not hurt. Cash reparations can be distributed unequitably, and it would trigger inflation, and it might devalue currency. So rather than trying to treat symptoms, we can treat the cause.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much to Knox for those questions, and thanks to San Fernando Central for those responses. San Fernando, it's your time to ask your questions of Knox College.
So our first question is, how would your chosen or preferred method of reparations be protected from corruption or mismanagement?
Please repeat.
How would your chosen or preferred method of reparations be protected, from corruption or mismanagement?
Well, we prefer all other forms of reparations. The main message that you are pushing is the only form of reparation that is significant to heal the harm that was caused by chattel slavery is infrastructural development. We are saying that there are other forms of reparations that can be helpful. That's being reparations that speak about cultural solidarity and reparations that address emotional trauma caused by chattel slavery. This can be protected from corruption due to the fact that it unites a wider nation. It cannot be corrupted as long as it fixes the issues that we would have been suffering from.
Thank you. Our next question is, how would your model work if infrastructure remains weak? Again, infrastructure does not refer to buildings or roads.
Please repeat the question.
How would that work if infrastructure refers How would your model of reparations work if infrastructure remains weak? Please note that infrastructure does not refer to buildings or roads.
Okay, so as stated earlier, the Caribbean would have suffered in other means, not just in infrastructural ways. They would have suffered some personal trauma due to chattel slavery. So it will work in other means. Firstly, addressing trauma that was caused by reforming cultural solidarity and cultural renewal within Caribbean countries, not just implementing cultural infrastructural development.
And to add to that answer, you are saying that infrastructure does not only mean does not mean buildings and roads. Infrastructure is defined as organizational structures.
Thank you. You're out of
Building,
time,
roads,
speaker. Sorry, you are out of time.
Okay.
Final question.
Right. Our third and final question is, how would individual compensation help Caribbean nations function during disasters without resilient infrastructure?
Please repeat.
Sorry about that. How does individual compensation help nations function during disasters without resilient infrastructure?
Well, individual compensation would help us to pay for infrastructure within this country. We don't need infrastructure from other countries whilst we have the money to pay for it. This money that we can receive can also be used for other things than just infrastructural development. It can aid in the stability of the economy and in achieving social factors that are important to Caribbean societies.
Additionally, if you build the people of a country, the people of a country make up the economic value of that country. If you build the country, you will subsequently build the economic value of that country.
Great. Thank you very much, and thanks to both teams for that exciting segment of cross-examination. We continue our debate now with the presentation from the deputy speakers, beginning with the Deputy Prime Minister, who hails from San Fernando Central Secondary School.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Trishada Odin, and I am the Deputy Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I would like to bring up the fact that our opposition leaders focusing on the emotional and psychological harm of reparation of slavery. We acknowledge that harm happened, but reparations must address material conditions that sustain trauma, poverty, weak healthcare, and limited education. Infrastructure creates the stability needed for healing. I would like to bring up the fact that Caribbean self-reliance cannot exist without strong infrastructure. CARICOM states remain trapped in high import dependence, fragile economies, and extreme climate vulnerability, conditions that are direct legacies of colonial extraction. Investing in infrastructure goes far beyond building roads and hospitals. It is a tool of economic liberation. Strategic infrastructure lowers transportation costs, education costs, and healthcare delivery, and deepens regional cooperation across CARICOM. For example, statistics show that the Caribbean spends approximately US $444 million every year on imported fossil fuels, draining resources that could be reinvested locally. Yet the region is rich in wind and solar energy, making renewable power a natural advantage. Reparative justice can fund renewable energy infrastructure such as solar and wind plants, upgrade electricity grids, and energy storage systems, allowing for the Caribbean to reduce dependence on foreign fuel markets, stabilize economies, and build long-term resilience. Therefore, infrastructure is not charity or development aid. It is a reparative investment that restores Caribbean autonomy, sustainability, and self-determination. Secondly, I would like to bring up the point of infrastructure can restore Caribbean agency and it breaks neocolonial dependence. First of all, what is neocolonialism? Neocolonialism is the indirect control of nations by developed countries using economic, political, and/or cultural pressures. Reparations must not only compensate for past harm, but also prevent its continuation. One of the most damaging legacies of colonialism is the Caribbean's continued dependence on former colonial powers and external states for healthcare, education, and economic survival. This dependence is not accidental. It is the modern extension of colonial underdevelopment. Today, Caribbean citizens are routinely forced to travel abroad for specialized medical treatment, tertiary education, and technical training. This drains national economies, reinforces brain drain, and keeps Caribbean states structurally reliant on the global Northeast essential services. Monetary or symbolic reparations do nothing to dismantle this dependence. In fact, they risk reinforcing it by offering short-term relief without long-term capacity. Infrastructural reparations, however, directly restore agency, investing in hospitals, research centers, universities, transport networks, and the digital infrastructure builds its internal capacity, reduces reliance on foreign systems, and empowers Caribbean societies to solve their own problems. What kind of freedom forces Caribbean people to leave their own region just to survive, study, or be treated? Will our people ever truly be free? If former colonial powers still remain in control of these services we depend on, colonialism hasn't ended but has evolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. We call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition now to advance the case on behalf of Team Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, for clarification, regardless of what the government believes, infrastructural development literally speaks to roads and buildings. There's no going around this fact. Limiting infrastructural development to its direct use in plantation societies limits its effectiveness and neglects to present the full benefits of it. For example, schools and hospitals, which are not immediate colonial tools, but immensely beneficial. So your stance neglects to realize even the most essential benefits of the reparatory system you seek to exclusively pursue. All protocols observed, my designation is Sybil Fullerton, the Deputy Opposition Leader of this Honorable House. I stand firmly in the opposition to the motion which posits exclusively pursuing infrastructural development as a form of reparation. In essence, the opposition does not disagree with infrastructural development as a form of reparation, but when painted as the only substantive way to keep reparation, then many issues arise. Firstly, it is noticeable how infrastructure has been used in aid of colonizers rather than the colonized. Britain already built railways, forts, and roads in the Caribbean during their colonial rule. These, however, were designed to extract sugar and resources, not help local populations. Some Caribbean countries, like Barbados, have their infrastructures already developed, but only due to the plantation system enforced by British slave masters. In this plantation system, our land was fundamentally taken from us, where we were used as maintenance for the land, simply inhabiting the land at the cost of our unpaid labor. Slaves were not granted the liberty to break from working on plantation fields. In fact, they were killed and beaten as a means of conformity and discipline. The main issue, however, is that the plantation society created a social hierarchy based on race, where Black slaves were placed at the bottom. This inequality based on race became permanent, where even in Caribbean countries, citizens with a darker complexion are disadvantaged, favoring those mixed with European descent. This creates a sense of marginalization within Caribbean society. Therefore, infrastructure here was used as a part of harm and cannot be used as a complete form of justice. This has impacted the Caribbean terribly, as they are almost afraid of infrastructural development due to past trauma. For example, in the general elections of Jamaica 2025, an MP by the name of Anne-Marie Vaz was voted out of parliament. This after she had fixed and made several roads in the parish of Portland. According to Portland's members, the main reason that they rejected Vaz was due to a widespread belief that she intended to sell local land to white outsiders and displace the Jamaican residents. This perception was deeply influenced by the historical term of colonization, which had fostered a long-lasting distrust of claims to infrastructural development. With their own people with people acting this way against their own people, they would most definitely reject this objective from their past colonizers. Secondly, cultural solidarity is more significant a form of reparation as opposed to infrastructural development. Colonialism also targeted cultural identity, where some language, religions, and traditions were banned, while imposing Eurocentric values. Cultural solidarity acknowledges this violence and seeks to repair the rupture in cultural memory and self-worth. While infrastructural development is good by itself, it cannot satisfy needs like spiritual or identity-based wounds. These cultural traits are monumental to the Caribbean as it brings them together as a society. So instead of allocating all resources into infrastructural development, it can be used to support cultural projects like oral history archives, language revival, and traditional arts that empower communities to reclaim narratives and strengthening collective identity. This is impactful as it will aid Caribbean people in understanding their true culture rather than a tampered culture imposed by Eurocentric laws. It enables Caribbean citizens to freely celebrate their heritage without shame, using Creole in its richest sense, learning cultural dances, and even practice their desired religion without being ridiculed by societal members still chained to colonial influences which stifled Caribbean societies through culture. This assistance in cultural renewal and retention would serve as an apology for the harm caused to the offended. It would also acknowledge that the harm caused to the offended whilst educating and empowering the individual. This will have a more far-reaching effect and creates a greater connection than any road or bridge. The formation of mutually beneficial alliances will bridge the gap, fill the hole, and light the way that was broken and darkened by chattel slavery. These alliances will aid in educating, training, and empowering individuals of the populace. Instead of just creating different types of infrastructure, it is far more effective to educate the population in ways of maintenance and repairs of social issues like cultural decay and wealth generation, and to achieve sustainable development. This is highly imperative as we will become less independent on our colonizers, to remove the chains and shackles bonded by financial indebtedness and by psychological burden. Rather than borrowed support, we, the Caribbean, aspire to have the strength of the people, to have renewal of self-identity, renewal of culture that sends a sense of hope that was ripped away by way of chattel slavery. Countries like Jamaica are aspiring to change their government system from a monarchy to a republic. This done by fostering the natural resources and the human characteristics of the country, which will give the government autonomy and development. This breaks us apart from our colonial past and mitigates the past of trauma, therefore achieving the objectives of reparations more significantly than infrastructural development. In conclusion, true justice can only be achieved when we factor in all forms of reparations to the betterment and advancements of the Caribbean countries. As all Caribbean countries are not presented with the same situation, they cannot all be presented by the same remedy of only infrastructural development. Reparations can also be achieved.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. That was the Deputy Leader of the Opposition coming to us from Knox College, representing the opposition side in this debate. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we now move swiftly into our second segment of cross-examination. The rules that obtain rather in the first instance also obtain in relation to time, but this time we're going to start with the questions coming from the proposition team, Team San Fernando Central Secondary School.
Good afternoon once again, Mr. Speaker. Can you name a single example where economies achieved independence without first building proper infrastructure?
Please repeat your question.
Can you name a single example where economies achieved independence without first building proper infrastructure?
So we are not saying that infrastructural development is not required. We are simply stating that it alone cannot suffice to build up an economy and to fully contribute to societal development and independence. An example of this can be used as Jamaica. Jamaica did not only build up infrastructures to become independent, they had to build up themselves socially, intellectually, and psychologically. Thank you.
All right, next question.
Thank you for your answer. Our second question, you brought up cash reparations earlier with the form of debt relief. What mechanism ensures cash reparations are not immediately absorbed by foreign imports instead of strengthening local economies?
All right, sorry, could you please just speak a bit slower? So we're just asking you to repeat just a bit slower.
Sorry about that. What mechanism ensures that reparations in the form of cash are not immediately absorbed by foreign imports instead of being invested into local economies?
Did you say cash or cast?
Cash.
Is there any word that you could substitute the word cash with?
Monetary reparations, financial reparations.
All right, so we're just going to ask you one more time to repeat with the terminology monetary reparation.
What mechanisms ensures that reparations in the form of monetary gain are not ensures that it's not immediately absorbed by foreign imports instead of being used to strengthen local economies?
Well, there are some forms of reparations that address this. One form of reparation speaks to statutory laws, which ban any other countries from doing the same thing of chattel slavery, which we are seeking reparations from. So that is exactly what stops other countries from imposing upon our income.
Final question.
Right. Finally, do you accept that energy dependence makes CARICOM states vulnerable to global price shocks? And if so, what is your alternative solution?
Can you please repeat?
Do you accept that energy dependence makes CARICOM states vulnerable to global price shocks? And if so, what is your alternative solution to that?
By answering your question, let me just state that this has nothing to do with the moot at hand. It's speaking about infrastructural development. Energy has nothing to do with this stance, therefore we have no answer for that. But what we can tell you is that infrastructural development is not the only form of reparation that is applicable to the Caribbean. There are other forms, and that is what we firmly stand on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that phase of cross-examination. We now turn to Knox to hear their three questions.
Energy is a part of infrastructure. You're right.
How do you expect citizens to reliably engage with this infrastructure when examples like Anne-Marie Vaz prove their distrust and decision for government infrastructure due to culturally ingrained aversions?
Can you repeat that question, please, slower? Thank you.
How do you expect citizens to reliably engage with this infrastructure when examples like Anne-Marie Vaz prove their distrust and derision from government infrastructure due to culturally ingrained aversions?
So sorry, but could you repeat once more, please?
How do you expect citizens to reliably engage with this infrastructure when examples like Anne-Marie Vaz prove their distrust and derision from government infrastructure due to culturally ingrained aversions?
The infrastructure allows for auditing, timelines, and oversight. The other forms of reparations are far more harder to track and more vulnerable to elite capture in small economies.
Additionally, we would like it to be known that we are not arguing against buildings, but we are arguing that buildings only matter because of the systems behind them. Thank you.
How do you contend with the fact that unique socio-political issues continue in Haiti, like in Haiti, do not allow for infrastructures to be useful to all citizens due to the social unrest, de-establishing it from the bottom up?
Could you repeat one more time?
How do you contend with the fact that unique socio-political issues, like in Haiti, continue that do not allow for infrastructures to be useful to all citizens due to the social unrest de-establishing it from the bottom up?
So we thank you for this wonderful question, because Haiti is a direct example of a direct result of what happens when infrastructure, proper infrastructure, is not put in place. People are left fighting, gangs run rampant because colonial systems have not been fully demolished. Rather than asking that question, I would suggest that you ask yourself, why do we see Haiti and continue to argue against infrastructure as reparatory justice? Thank you.
Knox College, you may ask your third and final question.
Why can't infrastructures be paired with with other forms of reparations?
So, in order to answer this question, we'll ask you once. Can you build a house without foundations? Infrastructure is the very backbone of all other forms of reparatory justice. Instead of treating symptoms, we will have to treat the cause. Infrastructure will directly prevent any of these waste products of colonialism to further pollute Caribbean nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both teams for what was quite an exciting period of cross-examination. We will now take a 1 minute pause, and after the 1 minute pause, we'll resume with the third speaker's presentation from either team, beginning with that from the opposition team. All right, so your 1 minute pause begins now. So your 1 minute having elapsed, it's now time for us to resume this debate. At this time, I call upon the third speaker from the opposition team, representing Knox College, to provide their 5 minutes response and ultimate summary of the debate. Knox College?
Yes, I am here.
Mhm.
All right. Mr. Speaker, what we have witnessed here today is an utter embarrassment to debating. Our protocols observed allow me to emphasize that this motion states that this House would exclusively pursue infrastructural development as a form of reparation. Mr. Speaker, our government does not know what infrastructural developments are. They claim that infrastructure is not building buildings, is not building roads. However, the clear definition of infrastructure is clearly building roads, building clear hospitals, schools, etc. to build a country's economy, to build a country's sense of pride in their nation. Additionally, the proposition would have stated infrastructure is not symbolic but transformative. Do you think that building a bridge or a road, furthermore, don't you think that building a bridge or a road is not symbolic in the sense that you are building a road in reparation to what your colonizers, to what your ancestors would have done? Furthermore, don't you believe that reparations should be symbolic? Again, I reference your definition of reparation, which is essentially compensation. What sense does it make for you to transform a region where there are people who still cannot afford to engage with them? What sense does it make to transform a country which cannot sustain its already depleting infrastructures? My proposition: this is not Bumblebee or Optimus Prime. This is a real world situation with a real world need for education, sustainable economies, and a need to afford to buy food in their already impoverished for their already impoverished families. And finally, the government, in their example of Haiti, agreed to the motion that infrastructural development is not the most effective in achieving reparations. So what we would have seen here today is the government essentially debating a motion that was not presented to us, is essentially debating a motion that does not include infrastructure, or rather the proper definition of infrastructure. The opposition rests.
We're finished.
Sorry, all right. So thank you very much to the speaker who would have just presented. That's the third speaker from Team Opposition Knox College, and I now invite to conclude the debate the third speaker from San Fernando Central School, Secondary School rather, to conclude the debate representing Team Proposition. Let's make that speaker welcome. Here, here.
Mr. Speaker, this is a perfect example of weaponized incompetence. In this context, infrastructure refers to the interconnected systems, institutions, and physical networks created to organize economic activity, governance, and social life. This includes not only buildings and roads, but also the economic, legal, educational, and transport systems that determine who controls resources, how labor is used, and who ultimately benefits. Not only, but the opposition wishes to state that we are only looking at infrastructure as being the only way of reparations, but they look at infrastructure from only one literal standpoint. I would say that's hypocrisy. Not only that, but the opposition wants us to believe that symbolic gestures or financial payouts can repair decades worth of societies that were deliberately designed to extract wealth, suppress development, and exclude descendants of the enslaved of opportunities. Colonialism didn't merely steal wages, it damaged systems. Reparations should not be symbolic, temporary, or divisive. Infrastructure is permanent, collective, and directly repairs colonial damage. We as a Caribbean do not need apologies that fade or checks that miraculously disappear. We need hospitals that heal. We need schools that empower and infrastructure that finally serves our people, not plantations. If colonialism damaged systems, not just individuals, should reparations repair systems and not just wallets? For these reasons, this House must and should exclusively pursue infrastructural development as a form of reparations. I urge you to stand with justice, sustainability, and true repair of the Caribbean and to affirm this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much to that speaker for presenting the final submission in this debate. Ladies and gentlemen, we as judges, we will go to deliberate, weigh the arguments, refresh ourselves as to what transpired in the match, and then ultimately we will return in about 10 or so minutes with the results of this match and the analysis. All right, so stay tuned. We'll be back shortly.
Good evening. Unity SFCSS. I'm Asante, Mr. Shishia, Simone, and Kuli.
And we are here to join the repertory debate because we believe that reparation should not even be a discussion or a debate. That it should be given to all those who have been impacted by the unfortunate reality of slavery. And we are here to show that our past influences our future, and our present depends on our past. Thank you.
Let's build up our nations. We are
Joshua Carter,
Mona Lisa Wright,
Sanjay Small,
Ayana Matthews,
Donia Maricela Allen,
and Stivell Fullerton.
We are representing Knox College, Jamaica.
We believe that reparations must be had
Today.
Following the colonial rule of the European powers, many countries have been exploited and the major resources have been depleted. Despite this, these same colonial powers have been thriving off of our development. They have been thriving off of our unpaid labor. We are saying that we are to be compensated for our hard years of labor. We are to be compensated for every single work that we would have put into your development. You built your wealth off of our back. So,
we deserve reparations.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional stroke international debating competition And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Education about the history of the oppression of a people can either be a tool for liberation or a tool for reinforcing trauma. What allows for education to be one or the other is not the topics taught, but how they are delivered. Therefore, we, the proposition, would like to firmly state that teaching the history of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, or TTEA for short, does significantly more harm than good, not because of the topic, but because of the current pedagogical approach taken. Your average high schooler learns about the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans through a rigid, standardized curriculum. They are taught by a teacher who is expected to simply deliver information, often in a lecture format, and test students on their ability to memorize facts, years, and names. In this setting, students are not invited to engage critically with the material, ask difficult questions, or relate the content to their own lived experiences. Instead, they passively receive a version of history unable to truly process its relevance, impact, or emotional weight. Where is the opportunity to understand how this horror shaped the blood in our veins and the names we carry? There is none. Students memorize facts and regurgitate them on paper. But inside, the lesson lingers, that the history of the African diaspora is one of subjugation, and that their place in the world is to suffer and survive, not to lead, not to thrive. This is exactly what Paulo Freire, in his work The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, described as the banking method of education, where students are treated as empty accounts to be filled by the teacher. Freire believed this model was fundamentally oppressive because it prevents learners from becoming active participants in their own liberation. It discourages dialogue, reflection, and consciousness raising. This is what he calls conscientization. The teaching of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans today in many classrooms still follows this harmful pattern. When this topic is taught in a banking method that assumes dichotomy between human beings and the world they live in, Freire says an individual is a spectator rather than a recreator. This kind of teaching doesn't empower, it conditions students to fit into a world shaped by oppression rather than resist it. And that is why we say it does more harm than good, because it teaches history in a way that keeps students passive, not engaged. We learn about Oladoye Ekiano, we learn his name, we learn that he experienced this and he wrote an account, but do we open the book and study it and analyze it and discuss it with our teachers the way that Israeli schools discuss Elie Wiesel's Night of the Holocaust? The opposition says they want students to learn about the slave trade and the enslavement of the people. And of course, we all want all students across the world to have reverence for this grave and absolutely horrific period of history. And we do this with the intention that learning about it can empower them to challenge the lingering legacies of racism and inequality. However, defending the status quo, which our opposition seeks to uphold and claims offers us more good than harm, will not offer us this. This is not remembrance. This is not reverence. And when you trace the system back to its roots, you realize that this is not our system at all. Accepted.
The fact that students today are not listening about the brutality, but also about the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies, creating empowerment more than harm.
Right. Our issue is not with these topics being taught, but it is the way that they are taught and the way that they are emphasized with regards to all of the other things that are occurring within African history. To continue, our education system was inherited from Britain, a colonial power that had no interest in nurturing Caribbean identity or liberation. And what good can we expect from teaching this topic when we are continuing to do so in England's pedagogical approach? Even worse, as you mentioned, African history is taught in the Americas and Europe as though it began with slavery. From primary school, students are introduced to African people not through the glory of their kingdoms, their intellectual traditions, or their achievements, but through their chains. Why is it so hard for you to name a single black figure whose legacy is not defined by resistance or white oppression? Why is it that we teach about Toussaint and Nani but not Imhotep, Mansa Musa, or Queen Nzinga in the same breath? This should be taught first. And compare this to how the Holocaust is taught in Israeli. This is taken from the Israeli Ministry of Education.
Point of information.
Declined. Children are introduced to the brilliance of their culture first, their thinkers, their faith, and their resilience before they are taught about genocide. Their oppression is contextualized within a legacy of strength, not as the first chapter. If that isn't a pedagogical problem, then what is? When slavery is taught primarily as a story of powerlessness and victimization, with the current banking method of pedagogy, it does more than inform. It deeply affects the psychological development of students, particularly those of the African diaspora. During adolescence, a critical time for identity formation, as described in Erickson's theory of psychosocial development, students are particularly vulnerable to internalizing messages about their race and their place in history. If the dominant narratives they encounter emphasize subjugation or this constant need to fight without also highlighting pre-colonial civilizations and agency, students may inherit a sense of trauma and inferiority. Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson's 1995 concept of stereotype threat shows that students underperform when they fear confirming negative stereotypes about their group, a common experience for Black students navigating a curriculum saturated with ancestral suffering. In classrooms where Black students only encounter these narratives and are rarely offered examples of greatness before colonial times, they are more likely to fear confirming negative stereotypes about Black intellectual inferiority. And yes, this study found that this did significantly reduce their academic performance. In contrast, we argue for emancipatory pedagogy, which views students as active co-creators of knowledge and encourages reflection, dialogue, and transformation. We want students to read and discuss the first accounts, and this should be a mandatory part of the curriculum, not an option. Additionally, students should be first met with pre-colonial history that showcases the richness and strength of Africans from various tribes and kingdoms before delving into the horrors of the slave trade. Through student-centered dialogic approaches, this topic becomes not a detached narrative of victimhood, but a pathway to critical consciousness where students develop an internal locus of control, a sense of pride, and the tools to challenge injustice. When classrooms prioritize empathy, voice, and critical inquiry over memorization, the teaching of the TTEA can become what Freire calls a practice of freedom, not oppression. We are fully justified in arguing that teaching the history of the TTEA causes more harm than good on the basis of the heavily flawed pedagogy. In parliamentary debate, motions like this are evaluated based on the status quo, meaning how things are actually occurring now. As such, the opposition cannot shift the debate by suggesting that in some ideal future it could be taught differently or argue on the basis of the principle. We are debating the present, and the burden is to defend the way that it is taught now. Thank you.
All protocols observed, the opposition remains resolute against the motion. This House believes that the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans causes more harm than good. We in the opposition agree that there are flaws in the method, but we argue that even in its current form, teaching this history does far more good than harm. We accept the definitions posited by the opposition with the exception of the word harm. Harm caused by the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans in this case is more like temporary discomfort that fosters long-term justice awareness and healing. The burdens. The proposition burden is to prove that the act of teaching this history is inherently harmful, even when taught well, and that these harms are so deep and widespread that they outweigh all educational and social benefits. We must prove that the current approach generates more harm than good, and 2, the harm is not inherent to the method but as a result of poor implementation, and 3, that the teaching of enslaved Africans creates civic awareness, empathy, prevention of recurrence, and general social progress. The status quo. The history of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans is already being taught, but with growing care and impact. Students today are learning not just about the brutality, but also the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies of inequality. Yes, some schools get it wrong. Reform is being done for more inclusive, trauma-informed, and empowering education, making it the norm. Mr. Speaker, we are not for the current way of teaching this history. The motion didn't state the current way. We are for the best way of teaching this history. Allow me to rebut. And this best way is trauma-informed teaching. This would be training teachers to handle emotional topics with care, no graphic reenactment, use check-ins, and create safe spaces. This builds resilience instead of re-traumatizing students. And 2, balancing the story. Don't stop at brutality. Teach about African civilization, resistance leaders like Nani of the Marus, and achievements of the African diaspora that restores pride and identity. 3, we would center real voices, use first-hand accounts, African scholars, and cultural sources to humanize the content and shift away from cold textbook trauma, and link the past to the present, which will let students reflect through debate, which is already being done, and modern connections to racism and justice. This transforms discomfort into action and purpose, including Black educators. Involve Black voices in teaching is as authenticity, prevents tone deafness, and build trust in diverse classroom. This is credible as the RAN program has a similar approach, and it has proven to be working, as it has a 94% increase in the racial unity and empowerment. Allow me to rebut the misconceptions provided by the government. The government stated that teaching of trafficking of enslaved African causes discomfort and psychological harm. But let me say that discomfort is not harm, Mr. Speaker. And the 2019 UNESCO states that students taught slavery alongside resistance have greater empathy and understanding of justice. And secondly, discomfort is necessary for growth and historical reckoning, just like the Holocaust education or genocide studies. They also stated that the current method does not include the history before slavery. But Mr. Speaker, let me say that this is a big misconception. Most syllabi incorporates the history of the Africans before they were colonized. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Mansa Musa. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Songhai Empire. It is in the rationale also and syllabi that the teachers should use discussions to actually engage the students. In today's debate, I will bring 2 substantive. 1, the current methods build civic awareness, empathy, and critical thinking. And 2, discomfort from learning is not the same as harm. It leads to empowerment. My second speaker will discuss justice and the prevention of repetition in the injustice, while my third speaker will prove why we remain supreme. Our first substantive is the harm lies in the method, not the content. My first warrant is balanced teaching that includes stories of resistance and survival, reduces emotional harm, and builds empathy. When we emphasize both suffering and human dignity in the trafficking of enslaved Africans by teaching resistance, African agency, and survival, we shift from trauma to empowerment. It does more harm than good because it builds pride, resilience, and understanding. For example, the Holocaust education isn't taught by showing only images of death camps. They come with stories of resistance, survival, and moral courage. It fosters pride, empathy, and moral courage instead of guilt or division. That's why balanced, trauma-informed teaching benefits are supreme. My second warrant is effective, safe teaching already exists and work. We're seeing programs like Facing History and Ourselves offer concrete evidence that teaching hard history can be both emotionally and safe, intellectually enriching. According to a 2021 RAN Corporation study, students in these programs which is a reform program by the way, show that 94% increase in civic agency, meaning they felt more empowered to take social action and reported deeper empathy, stronger historical understanding, and more open-minded closed-minded attitude. And the fact that we're seeing this in real classroom, Mr. Speaker, proves that harm is not inherent to the topic. It's about how we design the curriculum and support teachers. And we are currently doing this now to reform. If we have models that work, and we do, then the moral burden shifts to improving delivery, not erasing the content. What my third warrant is suppressing this history causes more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, be aware that we're not talking just about the current history. We're talking about the teaching of the history overall, because that's what the mood says. In environments where slavery is ignored or downplayed, misinformation spreads like wildfire. Students grow up believing that slavery was minor, that racism is just a mere relic of the past, or that systemic inequality is simply an overreaction. This ignorance sustains real-world harm, and contrary to this, we're seeing that countries like Germany, who have faced their history head-on with regards to the Holocaust, show lower levels of historical denialism and far-right extremism than those that whitewash. The impact, it promotes social equity and activism, because when students learn this history accurately and empathetically, they become more socially aware, engaged, and ready to challenge injustice. And two, it empowers empathetic, informed citizens who are empowered to fight modern injustice. And three, it protects future generations from repeating injustice. My second substantive is silence enables racism to thrive. My first warrant is when schools avoid teaching slavery, they leave students with distorted or incomplete narratives. In the absence of formal education, when students are left to piece together understanding from biased media, peer opinions, or online misinformation, the result is a deeply distorted view of race and history. A 2018 SPLC report showed that only 8% of the US high school seniors could identify slavery as the primary cause of the Civil War. When students believe that slavery was a voluntary arrangement or that racism ended in 1865, it undermines every effort to promote justice and equality today. Silence gives racism plausible deniability that it suggests falsely that if we don't talk about injustice, it must not exist. The impact, it ensures future generations. And with that, the proposition momentarily rests.
400 years ago. 400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what will be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you would be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? Oh, the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, master said that's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations, we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get our strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight, we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave. Rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
This is something that I wanted to discuss since Emancipation Day, but did you know that Britain only finished paying for slavery in 2015? Yes, 2015 as in 10 years ago. This fact was revealed in a since deleted tweet back on February 9, 2018 by the then Her Majesty's Treasury. In 1833, Britain borrowed 40% of its national budget, £20 million, to finance the Slavery Abolition Act. This act was the official end of British slavery and went into effect on August 1st, 1834. The money that was borrowed was used to repay British slave masters for their quote-unquote loss of property. However, for the enslaved, there was no repayment and no form of compensation was offered. The amount that was borrowed, the £20 million, was equal to £2.2 billion in today's money. The since deleted tweet from Her Majesty's Treasury pointed out that the taxes paid by people today was used to repay the loan that paid the slave masters. This would mean that people from the Windrush generation and their descendants, people from Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and other British colonies, would have helped to repay the loan taken out to pay the people who enslaved their ancestors. Using this video, I want to highlight that when people say that slavery was so long ago, 400 years ago, ancient history, and we should get over it, we can see that it wasn't that long ago. If we look at a timeline of the history of Barbados, we can see that chattel slavery in Barbados lasted 207 years, whereas the time from emancipation in 1834 to today is only 191 years. So as a nation, we've spent longer in slavery than we've spent free. I want you to think about that. Facts like these are why people have started a call for reparations, to correct an injustice done to us as a nation, a region, and a people. If you want to learn more about reparations and how you can be involved, click the link in my bio.
What you take, give it back. Stolen riches, give it back. My name, you changed that. Your hate, keep that. My land, where's that? Green pastures now flat. Your greed did that. My religion, you stop that.
The African emancipation experience is a story of resistance and breakthrough, so that I could stand before you and speak to you because my ancestors paid the price for me. So when you look at me, see not just African beauty, but freedom in its entirety, where black is beautiful and freedom is opportunity, where people who look like me can be celebrated equally. Don't be distracted by my melanin. This skin that was once frowned upon is now flourishing. And if you know not to which I am speaking, then let the history lesson begin. To understand where we're going, we must first understand where we come from. So for some, this story begins at the bottom of a ship, forcefully migrated from the motherland as human cargo, an economical decision to work on a sugar plantation, and so slavery began. Beaten mercilessly, and regardless of sex, they were all treated as property. Can you imagine what it would be like to not be in control of oneself, to have your very life determined by somebody else? And if you want to talk about human rights violations, slavery is the definition. Punishment, imprisonment, torture, mutilation, sold without hesitation, separated from tribes to limit communication, and if you even harm an African ritual master could have your tongue for that. So on the plantation, it had none of that. We did what we were told, no questions asked. After all, slavery was an organized business and we were just labor. To work without receiving $1, branded and assigned Christian names didn't make it any better. But I am the prayers of my ancestors answered. A strong black African woman whose voice has the power to command even the boldest man, whose power comes from purpose, whose pain has inspired passion. So every African descendant walking confident continues to break the chains of a cycle. On August 1st, 1838, my generation was molded in hope, paid for in sacrifice, bought in tears. So when these heirs hear the words African emancipation, can we understand the dedication of our ancestors' contribution to civilization? Because these doorways to freedom that we walk through so gracefully was paid for with the life of your mummy's mommy. So I wear my African heritage proudly, as this poem speaks to who we are, who we were, and who we will be. And since I get to decide, I will take my African emancipation walk in stride. Stand with me, side by side. Black woman to black man, black boys to black girls. Let our stories be told with honor. Let the skin be celebrated in boldness. For in the end, this story was always destined for greatness. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional stroke international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history. And having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone, to have a real conversation about repair. And the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Education about the history of the oppression of a people can either be a tool for liberation or a tool for reinforcing trauma. What allows for education to be one or the other is not the topics taught, but how they are delivered. Therefore, we, the proposition, would like to firmly state that teaching the history of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, or TTEA for short, does significantly more harm than good, not because of the topic, but because of the current pedagogical approach taken. Your average high schooler learns about the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans through a rigid, standardized curriculum. They are taught by a teacher who is expected to simply deliver information, often in a lecture format, and test students on their ability to memorize facts, years, and names. In this setting, students are not invited to engage critically with the material, ask difficult questions, or relate the content to their own lived experiences. Instead, they passively receive a version of history unable to truly process its relevance, impact, or emotional weight. Where is the opportunity to understand how this horror shaped the blood in our veins and the names we carry? There is none. Students memorize facts and regurgitate them on paper. But inside, the lesson lingers that the history of the African diaspora is one of subjugation and that their place in the world is to suffer and survive, not to lead, not to thrive. This is exactly what Paulo Freire, in his work The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, described as the banking method of education, where students are treated as empty accounts to be filled by the teacher. Freire believed this model was fundamentally oppressive because it prevents learners from becoming active participants in their own liberation. It discourages dialogue, reflection, and consciousness raising. This is what he calls conscientization, the teaching
We are heading into the results segment of this debate. The debate featured the team in proposition, San Fernando Central Secondary School. They went up against, of course, they are from Trinidad and Tobago. They went up against Knox College from Jamaica. The motion that they debated looked at whether we should restrict, limit reparations to infrastructural development. So have reparations be only exclusively about infrastructure development, nothing else, right? It was interesting in the estimation of the adjudicators, the way San Fernando framed infrastructure development. They sort of expanded it beyond, constructing roads, bridges, buildings at large, physical infrastructure, to more infrastructure that speaks to the legislative, the social issues that would have represented the legacy of the period of enslavement. We sort of agonized about that as a panel of adjudicators. There were two interpretations floated on the panel. Some on the panel felt that it was San Fernando speaking to physical infrastructure leading to improvements in these domains. Others felt that though it was that there would be an attempt to treat directly with these issues as a means of reparations. We're unclear as a panel, certainly unanimous. We didn't have a unanimous appreciation as to what was meant by infrastructure development extending to or meaning development in the domains of the legislative, the social, and the cultural domains. Okay, so a little more clarity was needed from that. Suffice it to say, we felt that this motion necessarily limits San Fernando to infrastructure development, as in physical infrastructure. So we're talking about roads, bridges, hospitals, buildings at large, construction of civil infrastructure predominantly. Therefore, and this is necessarily the case because if it entails the kinds of sort of other forms of infrastructure like legal infrastructure and so forth, social infrastructure, then that becomes effectively the sum total of reparations, which we think limits too severely the range of argumentation allowable and available to Knox College. All right. Okay, so that's first point worth appreciating. The second consideration that we had was, to what extent does San Fernando prove to us that there is going to be an appreciable resolution to the issues flowing from the period of enslavement and colonialism? How is it that we're going to ultimately get resolutions to those other, what I call social, societal concerns, right? We think that more needed to have been done to prove that there is going to be a logical resolution of these issues once we invest in physical infrastructure. Okay. That said, we get a fair amount of analysis of, in terms of examples and sort of sort of persuasive argumentation that helps us to appreciate that there is going to be some improvement, whether or not the improvement is adequate, whether or not the improvement is greater than that which we would get in Knox's world, we're still somewhat uncertain. Okay, let's talk about what we get from Knox College. Knox College tells us that the ills of the period of enslavement and colonialism are reflected in things like cultural erosion, erasure, land dispossession, and other societal and social concerns that linger to today. They say to us that infrastructure development, as in physical infrastructure, civil infrastructure development, will not adequately and meaningfully solve those issues. Okay, they say to us that what is needed are things like, well, not explicitly, but we felt tacitly at least, they pointed to cash transfers and the donations as being one way in which we could get infrastructure, it's not infrastructure, reparations, and that reparations would have been certainly more appropriate in treating right across the Caribbean with the issues that exist coming out of slavery and of course, colonialism. Of course, we felt that there was not an adequate response, though, Knox, to the concerns raised by San Fernando, having to do with how do we, provide certainty that the funds, the resources, be it through debt cancellation or financial monetary donations, how is it that that is going to actually be used to solve the problems that result from, again, that unfortunate period of slavery and colonialism? We're uncertain. Again, a lot of it sounded to us to be fairly assertive, needed to have been a lot more sort of mechanized in a sort of strategic way to prove to us that this is likely to be the case. In as much as, for example, San Fernando tells us that what guarantees do we have that once the funds are received, that it won't be used simply to provide, things like, balance of trade payments, paying money to import goods, and ultimately we lose out on the potential for infrastructural development and other forms of development. To which Knox tells us that, well, it will happen, that we will use the money for infrastructural development as a means of attending to the quest for reparations. Again, we're not sure what incentive exists within the Caribbean by Caribbean governments at large to apportion the funds for these purposes, generally speaking. Okay. Another consideration that was prominent in the discussion is whether or not we actually get solvents in either world, quite frankly, to the issues that are of concern here. We didn't feel as though either team does do a tremendous job, again, to prove that there is going to be appropriate resolution in the issues that are of concern. We though felt that intuitively there's going to be some improvement, almost assured, in as much as to build a school necessarily means that more resources are going to be provided. In as much as to build a road, it means that there's going to be easier commute for persons to do work and to engage in commerce, and there's generally speaking going to be an improvement in the economic standards that are available. And so we felt that intuition played in favor of San Fernando. When we balance it against what intuition there may have been, we felt like there may be some resolution to some of the issues. Again, we don't see how it is that that was mechanized by Knox College, and we don't see, for example, how is it that we're going to actually get any sort of assurance that the funds will be used in the ways that they are supposed to be used for the improvement of in the lives of the peoples within the Caribbean at large. Okay, so in the final analysis, the scores are as follows: 252 points as compared to 271 points. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner of this match in the international reparations debate competition for 2026, the first round match, first day actually of competition between San Fernando Knox College. The winner is Team Proposition, San Fernando Central Secondary School. Congratulations to you, San Fernando, on winning this match. All right. Just checking, am I being heard? All right, good. And of course, feel free to unmute your microphones and exclaim and give us some reactions. That's perfectly welcomed at this
Hi.
time.
Good afternoon once again. We are truly delighted that we won this competition. Knox College, you were great opponents. We learned a lot from this experience and really thank you for allowing us this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Very much.
All right, good, good. And Knox, do you have anything to say? All right, and we have another important announcement to make. The best debater comes to us as well from San Fernando Central Secondary School. And that is the second speaker. That's the Deputy Prime Minister, and you are the best debater. We were concerned, though, as a panel, that you did not use your time completely. You stopped short of the conclusion in terms of the allotted time. But we felt that the substantive arguments that you brought were really good. I think you delivered very good impacts, helping us to see as a panel a bit more of how it is that we are going to see better improvements in the lives of Caribbean people through infrastructure development, albeit, overall, the concern is that we felt that more needed to have been done. But I think we think you did the very best in proving that very important claim. All right. So congratulations again. Ladies and gentlemen, see you in a few days from now when we resume this competition, continuing with round 1 of the International Reparations Debate Competition for 2026. Take care.